Hey everyone, Brian here. I'm back again with another episode of Nerd Theater. Now, as you probably noticed, I'm not alone this time. For the first time in a while, I have a special guest star with me, and this is my girlfriend, Alyssa.
Hi.
Now, I thought that this would be the perfect episode to bring Alyssa in, because very much like me, she's a movie buff, but she's also a very big horror fan. And so we're going to be talking about the movie Shadow of the Vampire. Which is actually a movie that you showed me.
It is. And it's especially relevant right now because of the new Nosferatu remake coming out on Christmas.
Yeah, yep.
Mm-hmm.
This is the new Robert Eggers movie we're both super stoked for.
Oh, yeah.
Probably be around there sometime after Christmas, but... And it's also kind of coincidental because it has Willem Dafoe in it as well. So both movies have Willem Dafoe in it. Both are about Nosferatu, so they just meld together perfectly. Mm-hmm. So Shadow of the Vampire was directed by E. Elias Marriage, and it's kind of an interesting movie because it's not simply just a vampire story. It's actually a movie within a movie. So there's, of course, the famous silent horror film Nosferatu, which, of course, was an adaptation, a film adaptation of the classic Dracula story, and was kind of infamously almost lost to time because the Stoker estate, I believe, tried to wipe the film off the face of the earth. And they almost did, too. There's actually one copy of Nosferatu that survived, and thank God it did, because of that we have such an important piece of film history with visuals that have been mimicked and paid homage to and used as inspiration for years and years and years. We still see it today in directors like Tim Burton and stuff. So it's such an influential film. It's crazy that it was almost lost forever. That just absolutely blows my mind.
And in SpongeBob.
Yeah. A lot of people first saw Nosferatu in SpongeBob. So it's still being referenced years and years later in a mainstream Nickelodeon cartoon.
Wait! If that was you on the phone and you on the bus, then who was flickering the lights? Nosferatu!
So it's obviously had such a huge impact, and it's crazy to me that we almost never got any of that. But yeah, so setting that up, this is actually about the making of Nosferatu, but it doesn't just end there. Alyssa, you're obviously the most well-versed in this movie.
Yeah.
What's Shadow of the Vampire all about?
So Shadow of the Vampire is basically about the making of Nosferatu with a twist. Obviously, everything in this movie is fictionalized.
Yeah.
I don't think the actor, the actual Max Schrenk, or whatever you pronounce his name, honestly would want to be considered a vampire in real life. Anyways, the premise is John Malkovich is the director of Nosferatu. F.W. Moreau? I'm pretty sure it's Moreau. It's German. I'm not good with German. Anyway, so John Malkovich plays the director of Nosferatu, and the premise of the movie is that nobody knows who this guy is that they hired to play the vampire, and it's a big secret, and John Malkovich refuses to tell anybody anything about him, and it turns out he's an actual vampire. So he hired an actual vampire to play a vampire in his movie.
And he withholds this
knowledge from everybody.
Yeah, no one but him and Sir Nosferatu himself know about this.
Yes.
Which obviously sets up so much conflict and peril. And it's like, how far is he going to let this secret stretch on? How unsafe is the crew? Does the vampire have nefarious intentions?
And even, what are John Malkovich's character's intentions in this movie?
No one's really transparent in this from the get-go, except, of course, the crew, who's just kind of there to shoot a movie. But it does kind of make you wonder, okay, what movie is being made here? What kind of movie is being made here? Is it like an exploitative movie? Obviously, having the knowledge of the audience is, you've probably, if you're watching this movie, you've probably seen Nosferatu, but taking yourself out of that, putting yourself into the crew's shoes, like what kind of movie is being made here? Obviously, they're using a real vampire on set, which is wildly irresponsible, and it's just kind of a ticking time bomb of how long can this secret be kept, and how safe are the crew if not even the director fully knows if he can trust this vampire he's hired.
Absolutely. And I think, too, another, like, aspect of the movie is, like, kind of like a love letter to silent films in the silent film era. They really show you, especially at the beginning, like, everything that goes in, all the crew there, everybody. It's like Singing in the Rain.
Yeah.
When you see the behind the scenes of, like, you see how the movies are made.
Yeah.
It's very much a similar movie in that sort of way. Completely different tone from Singing in the Rain. But definitely like a love letter to silent film.
Yeah, that's a great comparison, because it really is a love letter. And it just shows, kind of the funny, like, little, I don't know, like, awkward behind-the-scenes moments of the, people trying to talk to. Like we mentioned before, they're using a real vampire. And so the director, what he says to kind of keep everyone's suspicions low, at least for a little bit, is that he's a method actor, which method acting didn't even exist then.
Yes, I think Marlon Brando was the first person to really embrace or become big with method acting, which that didn't happen until the 50s.
Yeah.
So it's like method acting before method acting. Yeah,
and his kind of thing that he keeps telling everyone is like, okay, he's a really professional actor. He wants to stay embodied in this vampire role. He's never gonna like break character, because he can't. He is that character. But that's, of course, the lie that he tells his crew. But so because of that, you get all these fun little like vignettes of the crew, these little moments of the crew trying to talk to the vampire, ask him about his life. And like he gives these like vague, cryptic answers. That, of course, to them sounds like, oh, he's just like this pretentious actor, like trying to stay in character, but he's actually telling the truth. Like when he's saying like, oh, hundreds of years ago I did this, or like I sailed into this country on ship and stuff like that. And he's just talking about his life, but it's actually true. He's not putting up a front. He's actually just telling them at face value where he came from and what he did. Yeah. And so it gives you this really dark, these dark comical moments of dramatic irony of like, we know, but they definitely don't know.
And I feel like, especially with Willem Dafoe, who's just completely amazing. He just embodies the character of Nosferatu completely. Yeah. I feel like he is inspired a bit by like Bela Lugosi's Dracula performance. Yeah. Obviously not all of it, because Bela Lugosi I feel like is a more suave type vampire, and he's definitely a more creep. You could see him eating a rat in like the store or something. Yeah. But I think he definitely was inspired partially by like his long. I'm thinking of a scene in particular where he's talking with a couple of the crew members and they're having drinks. Yeah. And he starts like reminiscing about his life and things like that. And I feel like that's very much like a listen to them, the children of the night, the music they make. That's a very Bela Lugosi-esque performance in that scene.
Listen to them, children of the night. What music they make.
That's a really good point. And Willem Dafoe kind of had the pleasure of by this point, and this movie was made in like I think it was 2000. Yeah. So he kind of had the pleasure of pulling from all these different adaptations. Obviously, the original text of the story of Dracula is the big one. But then you've got Bela Lugosi's performance.
Christopher Lee.
You've got Christopher Lee. You've got all the Hammer horror movies. You've got the Spanish remake,
which was filmed at the same time as the Bela Lugosi Dracula.
Yeah, so it's like a present tense make. I guess
I don't even know if it's a remake. I think it was just the same film made at the same time, but just with different actors. I don't know what you
Yeah.
would call that.
But all is that to say, Willem Dafoe had a lot of inspiration to pull from, but I could definitely see Bela Lugosi being a huge inspiration for his role. And it's interesting because, yeah, it's like you said, he's obviously pulling from the original Nosferatu movie too, because this Dracula is a much more creature-like, a more animalistic Dracula. Obviously, he's humanoid, but he's nowhere near something like Christopher Lee or Bela Lugosi, where it's like they feel much more human.
Or Gary Oldman.
Or Gary Oldman, where it's like, okay, yes, they are a monster, but they feel a lot closer to a human being than something like the original Nosferatu.
Absolutely. And I feel like, especially too, we've both seen The Last Voyage of the Demeter.
Yes.
And I think, obviously, that's definitely more of a creature version of Dracula, or of the vampire.
That is the weakest, most stripped down, desperate version of Dracula.
And I think, too, that has a lot to thank for this adaptation.
Yeah.
Of having this sort of, like, revisioning of the Nosferatu character.
Yeah. Dracula is such a cool character in the sense that he's almost like a Shakespeare character.
Yeah.
Where you can have a ton of different actors give completely different takes on the same character, and he's kind of transcended time, and no matter how many adaptations you get, every single time someone's going to be bringing something new to the table.
Absolutely. I hate the Stephen Moffat version of Dracula. That's my aside. The first 2 episodes were great. The third one ruined it.
I love his Dracula.
Oh, I love him as Dracula, though. That's the thing.
He's great.
Even if you have the worst script, if you have a great actor as a vampire, as the Dracula character, he can make the worst script. He can make it work.
Yeah. I wish I had, in Reach, I wish I had this glass. I have glass of Dracula, or of Nosferatu. I got it at this horror convention, and it was from this guy who did these incredible glass etches of classic horror characters. He had the Wolfman, he had Creature of the Black Lagoon, a ton of classic Universal monsters, but he also, my favorite one that he had on display was this it was Nosferatu, and it was him in the classic pose, and it's got this ring around him, and of course, he's a big horror nerd. I'm a big horror nerd, and so we just started talking about the various adaptations of Dracula, and he mentioned that BBC Dracula miniseries, and we both kind of were on the same page of how good it started, and then that third episode, they just couldn't stick that landing.
No, they couldn't.
But one thing that we were in tune with was just how dang good he was as Dracula.
Like, that second episode where they're on the boat and they're trying to figure out who is killing off everybody, and it's Dracula. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah, it's really, really good. Speaking of performances, though, Shadow of the Vampire, Willem Dafoe, he's so good in this movie. He got an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah.
Did not win, but because of this movie, because of the Oscar nomination, how much buzz his performance was getting, it actually got him a really iconic role. And what was that role, babe?
That role is the Green Goblin in the Spider-Man movie.
Out am I?
The original Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. They liked him in this so much. They're like, you can play a really good freak. We're gonna have you come back and play another freak in our Spider-Man movie. Can you imagine? Charismatic freak. Can you imagine anyone else playing Green Goblin?
Oh, definitely not.
He's just so good in that movie. Perfect casting. I honestly, obviously, you know me, I'm a huge fan of those Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, but casting all across the board is great. But I think if there's one actor you could point to for, like, they nailed it, no questions asked, it would be Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they brought him back for the new movie.
They brought him back, yeah. He made such an impact. He's still around as Green Goblin. It's such an incredible role. Actually, speaking of that, too, it almost wasn't Willem Dafoe.
So
There's actually a little bit of trivia you told me about before we started filming this.
Absolutely. So I found out that Nicolas Cage was one of the producers on this movie, and he was originally going to play the Nosferatu himself.
Yeah.
But Willem Dafoe wanted the role, and he auditioned so well that Nicolas Cage gave Willem Dafoe the role of Nosferatu, and so he stepped down and just became the producer instead.
Yeah. Which is a really big move by Nicolas Cage.
Oh, absolutely.
I feel like it could have been so easy for an actor of his caliber and an actor of his status to, like, kind of have an ego about it and be like, no, this is the role I'm meant to play. But I love that he could see, like, oh, no. Willem Dafoe is the right call for this.
And I feel like Nicolas Cage is that kind of actor who loves movies more than he does
himself. And his,
like, he can put the movie ahead of his own intentions.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And we've seen Nicolas Cage play vampire. We've seen him play Dracula. We know that he can do it.
Yeah.
But we also know that, I mean, you see Renfield. Obviously, Renfield's going for something completely different than Shadow the Vampire.
Some call me the Dark One. Others, the Lord of Death. To most, I am Dracula.
Okay, obviously we're dealing with a little bit more than just narcissism here.
It's more like a horror comedy. But he plays Dracula in that movie. Obviously, he probably would have done something different for this performance. But looking at Renfield, it would be hard to imagine that kind of Dracula fitting into this movie.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that Nicolas Cage could see that he's like, okay, we need someone else to step in and fill this role. And I think the movie's all the better for it. But it is interesting to kind of picture there is a world out there somewhere where we would have had possibly a Nicolas Cage Green Goblin.
That would have been insane.
It's such an interesting chain reaction. Had he not casted him in this movie, we might not have gotten Willem Dafoe in that Sam Raimi movie. So, thank you, Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the topic of performances, this movie is jam-packed with incredible performances. Obviously, the standout is Willem Dafoe as Nosferatu, but John Malkovich as the director.
Frederick Murnau.
Yeah, he's really, really good in this. This movie kind of reminds me a lot of Ed Wood, the old Johnny Depp, Tim Burton movie from the 90s, in the sense that it's a making-of movie. Obviously, Ed Wood's movies are a little more well documented than Nosferatu. A lot of this movie definitely take with a grain of salt as a fictionalized retelling. Obviously, because there's a real vampire in the movie, first off, but a lot of the details they're kind of going off of guessing, because there's not a lot of info about the making of this movie. But it reminds me of Ed Wood in the sense that the characters are all very, very memorable, because very much like Nosferatu, the kind of movies Ed Wood makes are very unique. They're like gothic. Obviously, Ed Wood makes a little more goofy, unintentionally bad movies. Nosferatu is obviously not a bad movie, but it's a kind of similar movie in the sense that it's weird, it's different, it's unique, and so it's fun
like a
to
cult
see.
Classic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's fun to see the kind of personalities that kind of movie would attract, the kind of people who'd want to work on a movie like that. And so every single character, there's just so much personality packed into this movie. All the little tiny, we mentioned the little vignettes of like conversations we get with the crew, and there's a lot of that where you really get those real moments where they're waiting for a take, they're waiting for lights to like be set up, waiting for a take to start. So we get these small little moments of character interaction that really show what these people are like on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And it's all kind of set to the backdrop of like 1920s Germany.
Yeah.
And then Eastern Europe, because they go to Czechoslovakia to film the rest of the movie.
Yes, yeah. Which locations in this movie, the locations that they shoot this film on, we'll get back to this a little bit later, but incredible. All of the sets look good. We'll get back to cinematography in a little bit, but man, it's a good looking movie.
Some other actors in the movie are Carrie Ewells as Fritz Arno Wagner, who was the cinematographer on the set of Nosferatu. Eddie Izzard is in this as well. She goes by she, her now, but she played Gustav von Wagenheim. Eddie Izzard's playing the actor playing
John Harker.
Harker.
yeah. There's almost that, for every role in here besides the crew members, it's like a hat on a hat.
And then you have Catherine McCormick as Greta Schroeder. And she plays the Mina Harker character. So she is the main female in the movie.
Yep.
She reminds me in the movie of like a grittier Liza Minnelli and Cabaret.
Yeah.
They kind of take place around the kind of the same time, but she's kind of got that like, she feels like in the song Cabaret, Liza Minnelli's talking about her friend who passed away, who was like a life of the party, took all the drugs and drank all the alcohol, and she's kind of like that friend who's I think she has a heroin or opium addiction in the film. Don't know if that is true for the real actress who played her, who she's playing.
Yep.
But
again, it's like this, everything in this movie definitely take with a grain of salt.
Absolutely. But the opium addiction actually comes in handy
Yes.
Later on in the film.
Yep.
Surprising as that sounds, I don't think an opium addiction ever should come in handy, but
it does in this case.
It does in this case.
Yeah, it's a nice little setup that you don't expect to be paid off in the way it does.
Yes,
but
yeah.
it's interesting that it does something that you think is just like a little character note ends up being something that helps her in the end.
Yeah, a good time party girl from the Weimar Republic in Germany.
Yeah.
You didn't think that sort of payoff would happen for Nosferatu.
Mm-mm. And then another performance that I really, really enjoyed, Udo Kier as Alvin Grau, he's like an occultist, like set designer. He does like art and makeup and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's great in this. Obviously goes without saying Udo Kier is awesome. I feel like he just elevates anything he's in. And this is no exception. So just wall to wall, incredible performances.
I don't even think we've talked about John Malkovich. We've mentioned John Malkovich as the director.
We have.
But I don't think we've talked about his performance.
No.
Yeah.
He's great.
And he's incredible.
He's really good in this.
He really matches Willem Dafoe's like freak.
He does match his freak.
Especially, it's like he plays the perfect, I guess, auteur of film in this movie. Yeah, he's that kind of like he wants what he wants. Yep. And the film is his way or the highway type director.
Absolutely,
he has a vision and he's going to stick to his vision.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the expense of his cast and crew.
Yeah, it's really interesting in that way too, because John Malkovich's performance is great, and it's comedic to an extent. It's one of those performances where it's like, and intentionally so, this isn't a slight to his performance. I think it's intentionally comedic in the beginning. Yeah, it's one of those performances where it's kind of like it's funny until it's not, because it starts out, and it is kind of funny that John Malkovich's character he's found a vampire. He's found a real life vampire to star in his movie about a movie about a vampire, and so that's ironic and that's like darkly funny, and it is comical to watch all of the cast and crew try to interact with this actor, not knowing really how to do it. Like, okay, he's method. What does that even mean? And all the while, John Malkovich knows that he's not an actor at all. Like, that is funny. But then as the movie goes on, vampires, what do they need? They need blood. They need to harvest. And so some of the crew members are being picked off, and it's slowly becoming more and more of a skeleton crew as the movie goes along. And so that's when it starts to become less funny, less comical, and the tone kind of shifts from darkly humorous to just dark. And it's like, it's unfortunate to see it happen the way that it does, because it's like, okay, he's obviously gone way too far. This was a horrible idea from the start. And it's an interesting commentary on just auteurism as a whole. and how it's good to have auteurs. It's good to have like creative control over your vision, but there's a line, and he certainly went a country mile over that line.
Absolutely. And like the fear that the cast and crew start to feel around Nosferatu. I'm thinking of the scene in particular with Eddie Izzard, and he's like interacting with Nosferatu, and just like how freaked out Eddie Izzard is to be opposite this guy. He could tell that something is wrong with this guy.
Yeah.
And he just can't figure out what it's almost like he can't believe that like this is an actual vampire.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like, we've seen this happen, I mean, in real life. Obviously not to this degree.
Yeah.
This is a little more fantastical than anything we've seen in real life, but like, there's countless examples of directors just taking things way too far, or creatives taking things way too far, where it's like the safety of the crew and the cast is not being taken as seriously as it should. It's not the top priority, and it's like, it's one of those things. Obviously we're preaching to the choir to a certain degree, but it's like, at the end of the day, it is just a movie.
Yeah.
Thinking of a stray example, I won't say who told us this or who it was, what the movie or show was, but there was a story I heard from someone in the film industry who was talking about this director who was super power hungry, was like all about, like you said, my way or the highway, and was using real explosives, and just really, really like was not taking precautions for action scenes. It was for an action production, but it was just, caution was absolutely being thrown to the wind, and this person who was telling the story, he and quite a few other people had to step away from it, and it's wild. Just this kind of like art imitating life in a certain way, and even though we don't know if Nosferatu had as tumultuous a production as it's shown in this movie, it is a good example of like what could go wrong if the helm of the director is given to the wrong person.
Well, I was gonna bring up Shelley Duvall in The Shining, and like all the like psychological torment she basically went through. Although I think
that one's an interesting one.
And I think Otto Preminger did the same thing to Gene Seberg in their movies together. But it's also kind of like, you've heard things about like Alfred Hitchcock too, like in The Birds with Tippi Hedren, they had like live birds tied to her up in the attic scene when she's up there with the bird, and they're like slamming the door and she like can't get out. Like she suffered like a lot of trauma because she was attacked by these birds on set. And so I know, especially like in this like classic, and this is like obviously even before classic Hollywood, like the silent era, like directors had so much more, it feels like they had so much more control in a bad way over their projects. And like people turned a blind eye to this sort of thing.
There weren't as many like systems in action that were like kind of like protecting these actors and the crew. Obviously we've come a long way since then, but it's so interesting. I mean, it is an interesting argument because on the one hand, like you mentioned Shelley Duvall, I know that one's a bit of a gray area because she herself has said that she wasn't tormented to that degree, but also Kubrick, I know, was really intense on set. I know he was like unfair to her in comparison to how he treated Jack Nicholson, which it can't be ignored. It did result in two incredible performances. It gives you Jack Torrance as like very cocky and arrogant, and it creates a character in Wendy that's very frail and kind of just riddled with anxiety and fear, but it's also like, could those two actors of that caliber have gotten there on their own anyway? I think the answer is probably yes. But it is an interesting argument, and like obviously we've seen Nosferatu, we know how good it is. It's a masterpiece. It's obviously, that's the end result of this fictionalized torment that the cast and crew underwent. So it is an interesting commentary on like, is it worth it? Like, is it worth it to put the crew and the cast through that kind of I don't know, trauma.
Yeah.
I don't think it is. Definitely this isn't worth it.
Yeah,
If your crew's getting eaten by a vampire, it's definitely not worth it.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
it is an interesting allegory for like unsafe sets. But yeah.
And maybe even like the lionization, because like I know the directors I've mentioned are canon directors. Like everyone adores their work. Their work is very important to like the history of film and things like that.
Yeah.
But at like what point, how far do you lionize these people?
Right. Yeah. Because as easy as it is for someone to be like, well, like they made like Nosferatu, or they made like some great film, and it's like we wouldn't have that. If those cautions weren't thrown into the wind, if the set were more safe, we wouldn't have as great of a movie or as great of as a performance as we do now. But then you look on the flip side of things. Let's say you get like a director who made a horrible movie, and they were also throwing caution to the wind and treating their actors and their crew horribly. You're going to see those same people come down hard on them and be like, wow, you treated them terribly and your movie's trash. It's like, okay, if you can excuse the greatness, you can't have it both ways. Like, sets should be safe. Like, it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way.
And I think that's just like the grayness of human nature. Like, how much are we willing to put up for good art?
Yeah. So there's also a really interesting moral argument in this movie. Something something that's been held as highly as Nosferatu. Like even that could have had a very dangerous, risky, poorly run set. And so it just does make you wonder as an audience member, okay, is this really all worth it?
Absolutely. Especially when you get to the end.
yeah, definitely. There's a twist or two there.
Well, researching for this video, I discovered they shot on location in Luxembourg, on some like old castle ruins and things like that.
Yeah.
Which I think really added to like the whole atmosphere of the film.
It does, absolutely. Yeah, everything in here, it just feels really, really tangible. It feels like they are actually going to these locations. It just has that extra layer of grit and authenticity.
And I think they did a really good job of like recreating the Nosferatu sets as well.
Yeah.
Within these locations that they were shooting at.
Yeah, absolutely. And they never felt, because obviously you could see in each scene what they're going for. It's like, okay, they're creating the iconic like staircase shadow scene right now, or they're doing this, they're doing that. You can kind of piece together what they're attempting, and you can see they're definitely paying homage. They're trying to make it feel like they are actually indeed shooting Nosferatu, but it never feels like they never have that big moment of like, look at this. Like, it never feels too showy. Like they're trying to do a one-to-one recreation. It's just kind of like, this is probably what production behind these iconic shots would have looked like.
Yeah, and I think that works a lot better than like doing, I don't know, sometimes if you have some like nostalgia type show or movie or something, it can be too over the top.
Yeah, a little heavy-handed. It's like, okay, we get, this is what the shot looks like, this is what this iconic thing looks like, we have that, what else, Yeah,
I will say, I really did like how we would transition in and out of the silent film.
Yeah.
So like we'd be watching them be performing the scene, and then it would turn into like us if we were watching it, like as if we were watching Nosferatu the movie itself.
Yeah.
They would show kind of like how that would look at that time period, how that film would have looked.
Yeah.
On screen.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, that part of it was really fascinating. It was honestly cool just seeing them piece this movie together.
Yeah.
And honestly, the visuals just look incredible. Like you said, they transition from the behind-the-scenes look, which in and of itself is still very like moody and atmospheric, very effectively so. Because there is always this sense of dread, because obviously they're filming with a real vampire. We're not sure what he's going to do. We're not sure like when he's going to flip, pull the rug underneath even the director's feet. and just start acting, on his own agenda. We're not sure
Yeah.
how long this whole like charade's gonna last. So there's always this looming sense of dread, and I feel like the visuals really help capture that. Like the night photography looks great in this movie. We were talking about like the castle interiors they shoot in, very effectively like shadowy and creepy. Like when we see the vampire for the first time, it's built up to so incredibly well.
Oh, absolutely.
He's obscured by shadows, and then he just slowly emerges, and he really does. It really does make him feel even more like a creature just coming out of the darkness, and it just works so well. And then you got the stuff like you were saying when they recreate the scenes and the shots in the movie, like that works really well. That transition from being on set with them to actually seeing what they're capturing, like it's seamless. It looks great. Just all around really, really good visuals.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one thing that I do wish they would have just had a little, like, just you cut like 5 minutes in, like put 5 extra minutes in. It would have really been interesting to see the coloring process for this movie.
Oh.
Obviously, this movie has next to nothing to do with the post-production side of Nosferatu. I don't think doing the post-production of Nosferatu, the way the story ends, it wouldn't have worked that way. That's not what the story's about. That's not what they're focusing on. But Nosferatu is so famous for having like the different colored stills, like the yellow tints. There's like a lot of like
Blue
magenta,
tints.
like purples. There's blue, green, even at some scenes. So it would have been kind of cool to see them in some way. I don't know how you would have gone about showing this, but showing them in some way, like picking these colors for these certain scenes and why they chose to go that way and like what that process looked like.
Yeah.
I think it would have been cool to see that part of the behind the scenes process, but like thinking about it in my head, I don't know where they could have squeezed this in, like those moments in. It would have just felt so separate from the story that they are telling. Everything happens like in real time as they're shooting the movie, so it would have felt kind of tacked on, but it would be interesting to see that through the filmmaker's perspective, what that process looked like.
I mean, maybe while they were still like at the studio in the beginning, maybe like he could have like those dailies, he could have just been like gone, maybe shown him like tinting them or just directing somebody to tint them.
Yeah, that's probably the only place he could have done it. Yeah, so they probably could have fit it in.
They could have.
That would be like the one thing I would have been like, I wish he just would have had a little extra time spent on that. But overall, I mean, there's just so much to gush about with this movie. I mean, just it works on every imaginable level. I mean, obviously we dedicate a lot of time in this video talking about the performances. That's a huge part of it. But man, the visuals look great. Even without the Nosferatu connection, it's just a very well done gothic atmospheric horror that I feel like you could throw on for Halloween and it would just fit the mood perfectly. So the visuals are great, performances are good, the story, the way that they tell the story is really fascinating. I love seeing the director's descent into madness. That was really, really fascinating. But well, that was Shadow of the Vampire. A really unique, kind of interesting mock behind the scenes story. Kind of like a fun what if narrative of a very already mysterious movie. But yeah, it's really, really fun. I loved Shadow of the Vampire. I'm really glad that you showed it to me and we could be here to talk about it today.
Absolutely, me too. Especially because it's so hard to find this movie streaming or even get the DVD. I think they did one DVD release in like 2000 and like that was it.
Yeah. It's kind of insane. It's
it
ironic that a movie like Nosferatu that was almost wiped off the face of the earth. It's ironic that a movie about the making of Nosferatu would also be so incredibly hard to find.
Oh, absolutely. It's insane. Nicolas Cage, if you're out there, please release this movie.
If you're watching, or anyone in a position of power who could make a better release of this movie happen, do it. More people need to see this.
Absolutely, I agree.
But that was the episode. Really, really fun movie. Thank you guys as always for watching. And until next time, guys, stay tuned.